God created Lebanon and blessed it with beautiful mountains and sunny beaches, the angels asked,
"Why are you so generous to this spot of land?"
God replied, "Wait until you see the neighbors I'm going to give them." That's Lebanon in a nutshell. It's just as blessed as it is fucked. And this time we shall take a step back and concern ourselves with how fucking old this landscape actually is. And like most old stuff, it has many stories to tell. So to change things up a little, let's focus on dry and unemotional geography. No wait, actually it's not that dry. Lebanon pretty much completely defies the stereotype of the deserty Middle Eastern country. Instead, it's a tasty sandwich of mountains, valleys, more mountains, and finally the coast. These diverse landscapes follow each other in quick succession, and none of them are more than 50 kilometers wide, which means that you can drive across all 4 zones in no more than 2 hours. But where would be the fun in that? For example, you would miss out on the Anti-Lebanon Mountains that make up the border with Syria. It's not that these mountains are hating on Lebanon, but rather they're opposing a mountain range called Mount Lebanon. They go all the way down to the Golan Heights, which are controlled by Israel. That's also where Mount Hermon is, an almost 3,000 meter massif that contains the tallest points in both Syria and Israel. This funny book here says that that's the place where the fallen angels first came to earth to make love to women, which according to Enoch produced giants. Also, it's mentioned in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is one of the oldest stories known to mankind. Nowadays, it's not quite so epic, because it's infested by mundane ski slopes and UN soldiers. The Anti-Lebanon acts as a rain shadow for the Syrian-owned stretch of land that follows, making it a desert. From the mountains, rivers are sourced that flow into the Bekaa Valley and make it hella fertile. Now the Bekaa Valley is incredibly important because this is where the Lebanese turn into farmers. And what do they farm? Well, drugs. Mekka Bekaa, Bekaa, Mekka Bekaa. Okay, enough of this dramatic music. How about some beats? Cannabis is the crop of choice, and as you would expect, the Hezbollah and Syria are in on the deal. Lebanese hash is renowned globally, and this is where it comes from. A place where tribes farm at least since the heyday of the Civil War, and probably never gave away their guns. Guns that keep the government away. A government that promised to legalize cannabis but never really did anything. Which is exactly what you'd expect from the Lebanese government. But there's one thing they would love to do. Capture this guy, Nusayr, the Pablo Escobar of the Middle East, who's based in the Bekaa, incidentally. He's got ties with Syria, which if you didn't know is a narco state that finances itself by selling a cheap amphetamine called Captagon. And Zayter is the biggest enabler of the operation. He's also on good terms with the Hezbollah, and got knowledge on smuggling routes and whatever you need to be a respectable drug kingpin. Of course, I guess he isn't all bad because he built schools in an otherwise neglected Bekaa Valley, and he's kinda respected by a lot of people there.
نحز عيتر ولا أحلى من هيك ولا أيدم من هيك ما شفنا إلا كل مليح منه يعني زلمة للغريب ولا القريب يعني قلبه طيب.
So, as always, the story isn't all black and white, but he probably does more harm than good. Because it is true that the ones farming these psychoactive cash crops are the Syrian refugees, and many of them are kids earning about $2 a day.
الأزمة السورية تشجعت كل الناس صارت تزرع.
In total, 400,000 refugees live in the Bekaa, and the winters are not easy by any means. Those refugees probably took the place of a lot of people that left because of the instability and constant crackdowns by the military. It's not an easy place.
يا أسماء تلف الحشيش ما بنسمح.
It's fertile, but it's not easy.
بنوجههم بالرصاص بيقوسونا رصاصة بنقوسون 10.
يعني الحكومة الدولة يعني
ما سهل يعني
بتساعدكم.
Never easy.
ما في شيء، ما في اشغال، ما في شيء، ما في شغل بالبلد هون. في كان فقير مزارع ما يقدر من صف السابات لا تصير تصياده بالارض.
مش باينغ لسه شيء. مثل ما بتصدرنا امريكا واوروبا ارهاب، نحن بنبيع المخدرات.
Beat switch.
Climate-wise, the valley experiences wet snowy winter and dry hot summers, which makes not only the hash premium but also the wine. 6,000 years of just the right weather made the wine from the Bekaa fucking delicious.
Even if we have a war, we can export it. People want to live.
Wine reflects the geography, the soil, the climate, the weather, the human being.
I tried it and it was probably the best wine of my life.
The taste of Lebanon. Taste of Lebanon is a taste which is very deep, rooted into history.
Whisper because the wine is sleeping now. It's a bit early for the wine.
Oh, sorry. I'm really bad at whispering. As we all came to expect of this country, the demographics are pretty mixed. There's any confession on the dance floor, plus the homeless neighbors. But a special shout out to the Shiites whose plentiful presence led to the Hezbollah pretty much owning the place. Geographically speaking, the Bekaa Valley is a continuation of a fault line called the Jordan Rift, which starts in Syria and ends in the Red Sea after it's done reading the newspaper in the Dead Sea. Ah shit, I almost forgot about this thing. Oh yeah. A Roman city from around when Jesus did his thing. They called it Heliopolis. Yes it is. Nowadays it's fucking tourist attraction in the middle of Hezbollah land, and they also got a flashy festival with nice performers. Like Lebanese pop diva Fairuz and fucking Massive Attack, man. As you would expect of a place called Mount Lebanon, this is the heart of the country. The Semitic word Liban, which means white, is the source of the pretty cool sounding name Lebanon, a name that also indicates the alpine climate that reigns over the mountains. This is arguably the most beautiful part of the country, because it's way greener than its counterpart the Anti. This is also where we'll go in the next episode. Stay tuned. Because of the proximity where all the Bible stuff happened, Mount Lebanon is mentioned in the Old Testament a whopping 71 times. Mostly because it's within the promised land that was promised to Moses. In the mystical cedar forest in the middle of the Lebanon Mountains, there's even trees just as old as the damn Roman Empire we're all supposedly thinking about. By the way, that's the tree on the Lebanese flag, and basically the definition of the Lebanese soul. This most rugged part of the country was first settled by the Druze until more and more Maronite Christians came around, and inevitably they clashed in the mid-1800s. Since then, the Christians made the mountains their stronghold in times of war and peace, while the Druze went down to the Shuf. The mountain people do have a very different accent that even people from the coast just a few kilometers away would struggle to understand.
كنت بصالون ببيروت عم بدي صبت شعري، وصلت عم تغسل لي شعري هاي البنت هاي، قلت لها خلصتي؟ قلت لها يا عمي شقشقي لي يا منيح. تركت هيك وربخت قعدت هيك وتغشت، قال لي عيديها. قلت لها شو عم قال لك شقشقي منيح؟ قالت لي شو يعني؟ قلت لها يعني فوحي.
Shit, I forgot about something else. The actual geography. The highest peak is Kurnat al-Sauda, or something like that, at 3,360 meters. Satisfied? Good. Let's move on. Well, the Shuf, the homeland of the Druze, which I already told you about. Technically speaking, the Shuf is just a branch of the Lebanon Mountains, be it the best preserved one. But culturally and politically, this region does have its own rules and even a designated leader. This guy, Walid Shumblat. who is head of the leftist Progressive Socialist Party and rules from his Jumblat palace in Mukhtara. Although there have been clashes between Jews and Christians here as well, for the most part they live in harmony. But if you think that the Shuf is not as diverse as any other place in Lebanon, then you're wrong. It's just that there are more Jews here than anywhere else in Lebanon. In the end, it's a third Sunnis, a third Druze, and a third Christians. And there we are, at the coast. The coast is an extremely narrow strip that rarely surpasses 6 kilometers. As you can see by the example of Beirut, the city pretty much extends into the hills that eventually become the mountains. Not much space to work with, but still, because of the rugged terrain that makes up most of the country, the coast is pretty much the only place for cities to form and thrive. But those cities are some of the oldest in the world. And I'm not even talking about Beirut and Tripoli. I'm talking about the civilizational remnants of the ancient Phoenicians with names that sound old by design, like Byblos, Sidon and Tyre. And that's where we'll start, down south where the inhabitants are forever wrestling with their controversial neighbor Israel. Funnily enough, even in the Old Testament, Tyre is described as one of the cities that conspires against God's people. Of course, one of the prophets couldn't help himself but prophesied the destruction of Tyre. And I'm just asking myself, which one? Because first it was reduced to rubble by the Babylonians in a siege that lasted 13 years, 580 before Christ came around, and then in 550 AD when all of the ancient Phoenician cities were destroyed by a massive earthquake and the resulting tsunami. Now it seems I have to explain who the fuck the Phoenicians were. Basically, they were the OG culture on this side of the Mediterranean, living their best lives from 1000 to 600 BC. The Phoenicians established not only most of the cities in Lebanon, but also major maritime trade routes that reached all the way to Spain. But rather than one continuous nation, you can think of the Phoenicians as more like a conglomeration of city-states. Those industrious motherfuckers had a respectable bunch of goods on their hands, like cedarwood, textiles, ivory, metals, whatever. But most of all, they had purple.
Yeah, I love being purple!
Personally, one of my favorite colors, next to Feldgrau. They got filthy rich by selling purple to the Mediterranean upper class, cause this color, back in the day, was quite rare. Only the Phoenicians knew how to extract it, namely from snails! Sea snails, mollusks and shit, yep. They were known throughout the ancient world for their incomparable craftsmanship. The Phoenicians, not the snails. So much so that the Greeks started to imitate them and make cheap replicas of their shit. To this day, a Lebanese person will proudly proclaim that he or she has Phoenician blood in their veins. And that might even be true. Studies found that every fourth Lebanese has Phoenician ancestry. Good for you guys. But other than the Phoenicians, every other important fucking civilization was here. You name it. The Romans, Egyptians, Alexander the Great, the Persians, Assyrians, Babylonians, Greeks, Byzantines, Ottomans, Crusaders. No, okay, actually those are more like religious fanatics, but you get the point. Infinite layers of dull-looking stones that explain the entire development of human culture on the Eurasian continent. Can you actually imagine the amount of history that still lays hidden beneath these cities? I certainly can't, cause I don't know shit about history, but I do imagine that Lebanon's coast is where archaeologists come to have a good fucking wank. But I digress. Back to Tyre. Here's a few fun facts. Tyre's got about 200,000 people, which makes it the fourth biggest city in Lebanon. It is the birthplace of Europa, not the continent, but rather a princess of Greek mythology that was so kind to give her name to the continent I personally eat, sleep and shit on. Oh, and by the way, that flying bull she's riding on, that's supposed to be Zeus, I guess. Don't ask me why. Tyre was founded by the Phoenicians from Sidon that were looking for a good place to build some more harbors. When they arrived, this peninsula you see now actually didn't exist. You see, after the Babylonians, Alexander the Great actually had a go at the city as well, and then he threw like all of the destroyed shit into the water to build a causeway to the island. And over the centuries, I guess this causeway actually developed into a landmass, and I guess that's how we get the look of today. Much better. Tyre profits from the many freshwater springs around the city, as well as the Litani River, which is the longest river of the country and unfortunately suffers from pollution. Funnily enough, nowadays the Lebanese diaspora from Tyre is predominantly based in Western African countries like Senegal and Nigeria. It is also said that there are vast reserves of untapped natural gas in front of Tyre's coast, but it hasn't been exploited yet because of border disputes with, well, Israel. Now a little further up north we got Sidon, or Saida, which is the mother of all Phoenician cities, or at least it was from here that their commercial empire exuded its influence. Sidon was very industrious and a big deal back then, until it got destroyed by the earthquake of 550 AD. It took a mere 1,000 years for Sidon to regain its importance.
Saida is called the mother of the poor because it's where people from all over Lebanon can come to an affordable place. Despite the economic crisis, people want to go out and have some fun.
If Tyre is the Shia headquarter, then you could say that Sidon is the Sunnis headquarter. But actually no, because actually Beirut is everybody's headquarter. Anyway, 250,000 people live in the metropolitan area, third biggest city of the country, yada yada yada. Let's move on. Byblos! Last but not least, we got Byblos. As the name suggests, this town is really old. The oldest of them all. I mean, it's inhabited since fucking 8,800 AD. That's more than 10,000 years, motherfuckers. Wrap your head around that. The word Bible actually comes from this city, not the other way around. It's because Byblos is the Greek word for papyrus, which the city was importing from Egypt, and papyrus, by the way, is not the same as paper, but rather fibers from a plant that looks like this. I didn't know that, just thought I would throw it in there. Also, it was here that the Phoenician alphabet was developed, which is quite relevant because from these kind of familiar looking characters developed Latin and Greek, and thus the script we're writing in today. Thanks Phoenicians, because without these letters I would be jobless. Byblos was an Egyptian colony for most of the time actually back in the day, and there was a well that probably doesn't exist anymore where parts of the Isis and Osiris myth happened. I mean, you see, I could name you so many historical facts about Lebanon, it's so old that it's actually fucking ludicrous. And it would be impossible to know when to stop. In the end, I'm just trying to convey how important these places were in the development of Eurasian culture. It's funny because where I come from, almost nobody has ever heard about these places. Now they're in a country that, because of it going to shit, has practically no tourists to appreciate the ancientness of it all. But oh well, let's just hope the ruins survive whatever comes next for Lebanon. And that concludes our little trip through the 4 regions of Lebanon. Actually, I just wanted to make a short video, now it's like 15 minutes, so fucking hell. I'll see you in the next episode. I need a break. Come to think of it, this video actually contained very little information about geography. Oh well.